You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by Nax. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Here we are, roughly the middle of the summer drive season, and gas prices are more than $1 lower than they were last year. Demand has rebounded to a certain extent. What are the trends that we might see for the rest of summer drive and heading into the fall and into 2024? That's going to be our discussion today. Joining us today for our discussion is longtime friend Denton Cinquegrana. He is chief oil analyst with OPIS. Been with us a couple times. It's been a while. Last time we had you on, Denton, we talked about this time last year, and things were quite different. So let's just start by gas prices are lower. Demand's recovered a little bit. What are the big differences in a year?
Yeah, well, Jeff, thanks again for having me. And you're right. Things are very different now than we were a year ago. And I guess it's that our greatest fears from 2022 never came to fruition in 2023, or even through the end of 22 rather. When you think about it, back when Russia invaded Ukraine, everyone lost their minds saying, okay, we're going to lose one of the largest oil producers in the world because of sanctions. Their production is going to go to zero. Or if it doesn't go to zero, it's going to be, really capped severely. It just didn't happen. Then when we got into the fall, there were some real concerns about diesel, low supplies, high natural gas prices in Europe, winter weather coming. Jeff, you're in the DC area. I'm in New Jersey. We didn't have much of a winter to speak of. So There you go. That reduces your heating oil demand. You never saw that big switching from natural gas to diesel in Europe. So those are two really big fears that never came to fruition from 2022 into 2023. Russian oil is still making its way into the markets. One of the kind of more interesting ways that it has somewhat made its way to the United States is that when you look at Energy Information Administration data, some of the imports of gasoline components and diesel, for example, I think back in February, and we'll update some of those numbers soon. The amount of refined product imports to the U.S. from India were the highest on record. India has been known to be a big buyer of that Russian crude oil, so it's hard to not think that Russian crude oil in some way or another has made its way to the United States so far, in late 2022 and into 2023 as well.
So for those who aren't really familiar with the oil and gas markets, OPIS collects data on pretty much every fueling location in the country. You look at by region, you look at all kinds of different data. I probably should have led with what's the 30 seconds on if people are going, oh, what's OPIS? I have no idea. Give us the background that I failed to start with about why you guys are experts on demand and where fuel is moving about the country.
Well, in particular on demand, we get retail volumes from probably about 30 to 35,000 stations throughout the United States. Some very large retailers, some smaller, some in the Northeast, some in the Southeast. So we have a really good kind of dispersion of different sizes, large retailers, high volume, high throughput to lower throughput types of stations. And at 30,000 with an estimated, 130,000 stations in the United States that sell gasoline, it's a pretty solid representation and a pretty good cross section. So that's one way we look at demand. We get retail prices from just about every station in the country through various products. And as a result, when you hear the AAA national average is X, Y, and Z, those numbers are coming from OPIS. But then we go, that's just on the retail level. We go several layers lower from the wholesale market, the racks where the trucks pick up the fuel and distribute to the retail outlets, and then go a level further to the spot markets where this is where major refineries and trading companies and major oil companies are all trading gasoline and diesel and jet fuel back and forth before it goes into a pipeline and makes its way from point A to point B. So really from the refinery up to the retail pump, we have plenty of data that we look at on a day-to-day basis, and it kind of gives us a pretty good idea of what might be coming down the line, especially at the retail level. And having done this for quite some time, I guess I'm showing my age where I say, I think I've come close to seeing it all. You never want to say you've seen it all, but I think I've come pretty close at this point.
I want to go back to something that some of us have seen, and that's you had talked about the fear that is baked into the price of gas at your corner station. And that's not fear that is happening on the lot. It is fear that goes all throughout the system, and fear may be too strong a word. It's the what if. It's related to the fact that oil is a commodity. It is traded like a stock. And there are people who think it may go higher. There are people who think it may go lower. Last year, roughly at this time, oil was $40 a barrel higher. Gas was about $1.30 higher. And there were actual supply issues and demand issues, and then there were perceived supply and demand issues. Let's look at both of those things. Well, first off, that fear premium, I remember hearing about that through the early this century, 2006, 7, 8. And that led to the first run up with $4 gas in 2008. So it is part of our everyday lives, whether we like it or not. The idea that people are predicting where gas and oil prices are going, and that affects what we pay as consumers.
Correct. And, there's always a sort of the way I like to describe geopolitics, and there's right now, I don't think there's much of a geopolitical risk premium baked into the market right now. But I always think of geopolitical issues as like a pot of water. It's always on the burner. It might be simmering and on the back burner, and it's just warm, and it's when you have your kind of winter mulling spices to make the house smell nice or something like that, or it's on the front burner and it's boiling and you're ready to throw in a pound of spaghetti. So it varies back and forth, but it's always there. Right now, that geopolitical risk premium is pretty low. And I think you can make an argument that it probably should be higher with OPEC plus cutting, with what has happened recently in Russia with the attempted coup, if you will. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the background that's probably not making it to the market right now because there's still fears of a recession, and there's still really high interest rates that sort of kind of cap some of the upside potential for the market.
And that, of course, would affect less supply, but demand. Because if there's a recession, then people cut back and you have industry. And so the two sides you always look at, supply and demand.
Right.
And you track them both.
Yep. And again, it's one of those things where, sure, you can make the argument that inventories of crude oil, of gasoline, of diesel in the United States are still below what might be considered a seasonal norm. But at the same time, you still have these fears out there of, what could be coming down the line in the form of higher interest rates, job losses, and a recession. So it's always a balancing factor. And I think I think some of the fears are kind of winning out. The bearish fears, if you will, are winning out over some of the potential geopolitical upside risks.
I want to stick on this topic for just at least one more question, and then we'll get to actual supply and demand. But we're in hurricane season, and hurricane season, if a storm hits Florida, it has a much different effect than if a storm hits Houston. Now, there's no question the human toll. Nobody wants to have a hurricane hit their house, but hitting a different area of the country means different things. And what we saw in 2017 with Hurricane Harvey, it hit Houston. It took out more than a quarter of all the refining capacity, at least short term. 2005, I don't think people realize what a big refining area the broader New Orleans area is. So
Yeah.
those two storms, you saw something very significant with gas prices that sometimes you don't see with some other storms that hit other areas of the country. What should most people look for when they look at a hurricane? Is there a certain area within the Gulf that you pay particular attention to? And if one hits Florida, what are the ramifications to supply and demand?
Sure. And again, I think you nailed it. And that's the first thing to preface all these comments by, like, not minimizing the human toll, the damage, the et cetera. All that happens with a hurricane, like last year in Southwest Florida, for example. But I keep an eye on whenever those cones of uncertainty come out from the National Hurricane Center. I keep an eye on a swath of the country from Pascagoula, Mississippi to Corpus Christi, Texas. There is a large amount of refining capacity within that kind of swath of the Gulf Coast. And you mentioned Harvey a couple years back. And I remember Harvey came to Houston, went in, kind of came back and just hung out over Houston for like several days. So that's an odd storm. Those are the hurricanes that are kind of really what we're worried about and what we're looking at, because that I would consider a supply destroyer. A hurricane that hits Florida or the Carolinas, or even something like Hurricane Sandy up here about 10 years ago, those are demand destroyers. When you think about it, there's no refining capacity in Florida. If anything, you see terminals shut down, and the few pipelines are there, and you can't bring in fuel via barges coming across the Gulf Coast. So that's more of an inconvenience. But when you look at something like Hurricane Ida a couple of years ago that went over New Orleans and through Lake Charles, Louisiana, it took out a refinery owned by Phillips 66. And, kind of in this world of declining gasoline demand, they made the investment decision that say, hey, is it worth throwing another $1 billion into fixing this up? Or do we just shut it down and use it as an import-export terminal, which is what it's currently being used for?
And of course, over the last 40 years, we've seen the number of refineries in this country get cut in half, from somewhere a little bit north of 300 to about 140 now. Same refining capacity, if not more, sure. with adding all the retrofits, et cetera. But yeah, that when a hurricane takes out a refinery now, the impact is greater because there's fewer refineries. So It's always something to look out for. And also, it always happens when there's a hurricane that hits a refining area. There's always pictures of somebody filling up their garbage can with extra fuel and sticking in their pickup truck. First off, that's a really bad idea. We could do a whole podcast on why that's a bad idea. But let's, at least for this podcast, just agree it's a terrible idea, people. Don't do it.
And the newest one that I've seen over the last couple of years is plastic bags. That's probably, again, don't do it, but you probably stand a better chance with your garbage can. But,
you may go viral, but you something worse than viral might happen.
You may go viral for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
But to that point, yes, we have more refining capacity with less refineries. So in essence, we're doing more with less. However, there's been some new refining capacity coming online in the United States over the last year and change, and it's all on the Gulf Coast. So now we're putting even more eggs in that Gulf Coast basket, so to speak. So again, any hurricanes that make its way in that, like I said, swath of land from Pascagoula, Mississippi to Corpus Christi, Texas, you got to keep a close eye on it and wonder what kind of impact it'll have on supply going forward.
And it's not just the winds, which can topple equipment, power outages, et cetera. It's also the rain. And that was what Harvey was. It was a soaker. And refineries have to get shut down, and it takes a while to restart them. And flooding can be just as devastating to machinery as high winds.
Yeah, if not more so. Salt water and oil don't mix, especially if you have flooding, coastal flooding. I think refiners invested a lot of money after Katrina to, safety refineries as much as they possibly can. They're also very smart about operations. They see something coming, they're gonna run down to minimal rates, and as it gets closer, then they'll do the safe shutdown instead of, hey, we're gonna be cowboys and we're gonna fight our way through this. These are expensive pieces of equipment, and they're complicated too. And when you take a refinery all the way down, there's always a chance of something going wrong coming back up. And once you restart, okay, you restarted. Well, you're not immediately making on-spec products, so that takes a little bit of time as well. So again, even if the coast is clear, a hurricane comes through, no damage, you're still looking at several days to a week and a half before things kind of get back to normal. And that's under a best case scenario.
So roughly 40 million people fill up every day. Convenience stores do about 80% of those fill-ups, roughly 32 million a day. And some days are busier than others, but it's fairly consistent in terms of people need to fill up a couple times a week. So we talked about the refining capacity. Over the last couple of years, there's been other infrastructure things that have caused significant concerns and challenges to the system. We had the Colonial Pipeline outage. We have a trucker shortage, an ongoing trucker shortage. And then last year, there was the concern about a train strike. And the train strike, not a whole lot of gas and oil goes by trains, but ethanol does. And that would have had a huge impact on our fueling supply because most gasoline has about 10% ethanol in it. So those are all things that are still there that you never know how something might play out. What are other elements of the infrastructure that may be of concern? And just thinking, not being gloomy, but just it works, but just concerns.
Yeah, no, gloomy always gets people's attention. But yeah, I mean, hurricanes in the Gulf Coast is obviously number 1, 2, and 3, basically. But let's think back to a couple of years ago. Colonial Pipeline had a cyber attack. If something like that happens to more pipelines, you could see parts of the country, for lack of a better term, a bit stranded from fuel supply. The pipelines obviously are the key arteries. So you always got to keep an eye on that. One of the things we're seeing, particularly here in the Northeast, is folks getting out of the terminal business. Some of that land is probably worth more being sold and developed versus still being used as a terminal. So I just wonder if there's enough storage. I think there is, but if we continue to see turnover in some of these parts of the country, get terminals taken away, does that mean we live more hand to mouth on fuel supply, and it's just one more kind of piece of the puzzle that's a little bit missing? And if you have a problem with a pipeline, then you could be stuck.
So we talked a lot about infrastructure concerns. We should probably end on a positive note and talk about here we are in the middle of the summer drive season. 4th of July was a strong driving season, and it's picked up a little this summer. Not quite at record levels, but looking a little better. What are some of what's the current state of the infrastructure of the supply demand equation, and what are some of the good stories as we transition from summer to fall and next year?
Yeah, so from a retailer's standpoint, I think you're seeing slightly better demand than last year. And again, to predict higher demand and lower prices this summer, when we were talking about December, was kind of a layup. It was hard to see a scenario where we get back to $5 again, considering what oil prices were doing late last year, what the forward curve looked like. And it was also a layup to say, hey, gasoline demand is going to be a little bit better. Just because we're paying $1.30, $1.20 less than a year ago, it gives people a little bit more confidence to, and being here in New Jersey and very close to the Jersey Shore, all the traffic that comes from different places in the northern part of the state that, you kind of curse these folks out when you see them on the road and say, go back home and whatnot. But anyway, I digress. It was pretty easy to see that gasoline demand would probably be a little bit better than this year, or than last year rather. But that being said, I find it hard to see a scenario where we get back to pre-COVID levels on gasoline demand. And the first thing that everyone's probably thinking right now is, oh, of course, it's EVs. It's not. I think EVs is probably a distant third of impacts on gasoline demand. One, our cars are much more efficient, and you mentioned that much earlier. But also, we still work from home quite a bit. Even in this hybrid environment, I think most people are either working from home 1 to 2 days a week. Me, unfortunately, I enjoyed going to an office. I'm home permanently. So I have a 10-year-old car with about 100,000 miles on it. It's sitting there. And it's probably going to continue to sit there unless I have to run little errands or something like that. Or, Jeff, next time we do this, maybe I'll just drive down there and we do it, in the same studio. But anyway, I think those are bigger factors right now than EVs. And I think that's the case for the rest of this decade. Then the 2030s, then it becomes a little bit different. But
if you think about it, just even working from home 1 day a week, let's just say on average, somebody were to work at home 1 day a week. That's 20% of the work week.
Yeah.
And that has a huge hit on demand because we know from our data that people are still going to stores, people are still driving, but that day is a shorter commute. It's probably a commute. We see more of a commute where somebody will go to the convenience store at 10:30. It's like, I got to see a human being. I'm tired of talking to people on pixels. I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee or at least have an interaction. But that may be a mile instead of 10 miles.
Right.
And same thing in the afternoon. It's 3:00. It's like, I need a break before I got to finish up my work. And there's a little spike there that we haven't previously seen before COVID. So, but they're smaller. The average car used to travel 33 miles a day. Looking at numbers, it's about 31 now. Yeah. So that by itself is significant.
It does. And again, when you consider there's about 270 million registered vehicles in the United States, light duty vehicles registered in the United States, it does add up. 2 miles doesn't sound like a lot now, but when it's like compounding interest, in a bank account or in some sort of investment vehicle, it adds up eventually. And I think that has the bigger impact on gasoline demand right now than electric cars do. Now that 10 years from now, we'll probably be having a completely different conversation. But for the rest of this decade, I still believe the working from home and more fuel efficient vehicles is the bigger impact on gasoline demand than EVs are right now.
So we'll have you next time in the studio. You can drive down from New Jersey, and just remember, you're the only state now that doesn't have a ban on self-serve gas. So we'll have to let you know how to fill up your tank and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I know you know how to do that, but when I would be in New York, there would occasionally be somebody with a New Jersey license plate that's just, can you just please help me?
I'll tell you what, it comes really in handy when it's really cold out.
It does, and that is New Jersey weather. So, thank you once again, Denton. Appreciate your insights. It is way better talking to you when gas prices are $1.30 lower than last year. But let's have more conversations. Absolutely,
Jeff. Thanks again for having me, and always a pleasure. And love doing this. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.